The David Bohm Society presents.
So I wanted to discuss something which is a bit different from what were discussed in the last 2 or 3 seminars we had, or perhaps 4. And there are 2 points now. One is that I should go over a bit of what we did, because some people here have not been through it, and maybe others have forgotten. Also, this material is not fully organized in my mind yet, so perhaps we will all participate together. You see, we will not, in order to clear it up, right? Now that perhaps we can have a dialogue or a discussion or whatever you want to call it. It's very hard with 50 people to have a complete exchange. I mentioned that last year, that it's simply too many, but because if everybody spoke, it would really occupy all the time. But we can have a kind of what I call a spirit of the dialogue. You see, the idea is that we can listen to each other, and if we hear things which violate our notion of what is right and true and so on, we don't. The ideal would be we don't suddenly jump up and say how outrageous, but rather suspend that and look at that and look at your own view and all the views together, right? Well, I'll come back to that more later, but that's a kind of beginning, saying even though we can't actually all exchange, we can all participate in this spirit of a dialogue, right? Which means both, as we'll come to later, to partake of and to take part in, right? The word participate. Now, in the last few meetings, or whatever we want to call them, I've been discussing thought, and primarily the nature of thought, and saying it's really, in my view, behind most of the problems of the human race. Now, it may seem to some people that a thing as abstract as thought can't be behind all these problems. There's something much more vital, real or solid must be behind them. But we have discussed it, those who have been here, in great length, showing that it is, you can see that it is behind it. You know, you can make a very good case for it. We're trying to get more volume.
Just so that
people can
be picked up.
Can be picked up. Yes. Now, I'll talk a little while, and I hope that soon we will start to discuss. And because I think it's essential to have a discussion or a dialogue. A discussion is an exchange. The word discuss is based on the same root as percussion, like a ping pong ball going back and forth. And a dialogue is something more of a common participation, as we're not playing a game against each other, but with each other. So now, see, how is it that thought? See, what are the troubles of the world? Well, they seem so many that we can hardly begin even to list them. You know, we can see everywhere wars going on, starvation, torture, pillage, you know, disease, all sorts of dirty tricks played in politics, and we have 2 sides. In addition, we have a kind of polarization between East and West. There are two sets of values. You see, each one professes its own. The West professes the value of the individual and freedom, and the East professes the value of the collective society, everybody being taken care of. And neither of these societies very well meets up to what they profess, but as we now know. Now, but still, they seem to be fighting over it. Now, or at least they're in a very hostile attitude, and they could fight. And then we have North and South that polarization. That the North is supposed to be more wealthy and the South less, so it clearly is. There's tremendous trouble in Africa and South America and in southern parts of Asia. Very great poverty and indebtedness and a breakdown of the economy and general chaos in what's going on there. Okay, so then we have the danger of nuclear war. It seems to have receded a bit because of Gorbachev, but nobody is sure that he's going to succeed, and perhaps not even he himself, although he must maintain his confidence. And if he doesn't succeed, we will be back where we were, if not worse. So if he does, things will look a bit better. Right? Now, so if there's a nuclear war, that's sort of the end of our civilization, or if not the human race. Right? Then you have the danger of ecological destruction. You have pollution. You have destruction of agricultural land, of forests. The change of climate they talk about now, and many other things. That there could be a real ecological disaster within us not too long a period of time if people just keep on doing whatever they're doing. And well, I don't need to multiply it. You see, we have growth of crime and violence everywhere, drugs and so on, indicating that people are very unhappy and not satisfied, and so on. So the list could be extended forever, almost. Now, I think if you look into this, it's all thought that's behind it, you see. See, thought is somehow going wrong. See, what about nationalism? You see, or what about the East-West division or the North-South? You see, people think in a certain way. They think we have our values of the East, their values of the East are our values of the West. We think we're here in the North and we're not very responsible for the South, and the South, they're just going their own way and so on. Everybody says, I belong to this group, to this country, to this nation, to this religion, and it doesn't matter what happens to the others. In fact, if they get in my way, we'll just fight. Now, that acts as if the people are acting as if they were all independent and all rather far away from each other. And independent of each other, but in fact everybody is completely interdependent. You see, everybody depends on trade now, and if trade stops, the whole thing collapses. Every country depends on every country. Pollution crosses the boundary, radioactive clouds cross the boundaries, and everything crosses the boundaries, including ideas and violence and so on, customs, habits. But everybody's thinking as if none of this is happening, right? It seems strange why they should, because it's so obvious that it is happening. You see, if you say, why should it be? Now, it's a way of thinking, right? People seem to be committed to this way of thinking, that people don't want to look at any other way of thinking, right? That people want to believe that everything is going to be all right, you see, without being too disturbed, without changing things too much. And see, people say, well, the economy is going all right here, why should we worry? I mean, some people say it isn't so good, but still those who feel it is going right say, well, it's okay for us, why should we worry about all those people? I mean, it's all right to think about them, but we needn't worry too much about them, right? But in fact, it all depends on them. You know, if it doesn't go right there, it won't go right here, you see, and vice versa. So that's a certain way of thinking. It's fragmentation, right? It's to break things up into bits as if they were independent. Now, it's not merely making divisions, but it's breaking things up, which are really not different or not separate. It's like taking a watch, I gave you an example, and smashing it into fragments, rather than its parts are taking it apart and finding its parts, right? You see, the parts are parts of a whole, but the fragments are just arbitrarily broken off from each other. And things that are really belong together are sort of treated as if they were not. That's one of the features of thought that's going wrong. Now, there are a great many other things. You see, I think we've gone into this, that thought is not behaving rationally. You see, that they wouldn't do that. If thought, to be rational about it, you would say we must acknowledge the fact of our interdependence and behave accordingly. You know, but people don't seem to do it, you see. There's a thought, it seems to be very hard for people to think that way, generally speaking. I mean, some people may, but you know, it's very hard. See, it's been said, some people have come out with the idea, what they call the Gaia Hypothesis, namely, the Earth is like a single organism. The whole of life on this planet, it makes a kind of organism which is very stable and which responds to protect itself, you know. And some people are very favorable to this hypothesis, saying if you believe it, then you would begin to put the Earth first. You see, it's like saying some cells of the body wouldn't put themselves first if they are part of the whole body. And of course they do sometimes. They are cancer cells. They grow first. They just keep on growing independent of the body, right? So you could say that this whole process, from the point of view of the Gaia hypothesis, what's going on is the proliferation of cancer all over the planet, right? Now, see, a few people take this hypothesis seriously, but you see, very few are really, as yet anyway, letting it change their whole approach, right? But maybe someday it will have an effect, you see. Now, you see, it's similar to a virus, you see, also a cancer, a virus. If you take a virus, it spreads, you see, there's a certain pattern of proteins in there, DNA, and when it enters your body, it sort of gives instructions to your body to make more of the same, right? Right? And then when you pass it on to somebody else, the same happens. It goes on and on. You see, so this information can be like a virus. We have a whole amount of thought, of knowledge, of information spreading all over the world. But the more computers and radio and television we have, the faster it spreads, right? And therefore, the virus of violence can spread, right? The virus of greed or the virus of fear. Or in fact, you may have read in the papers, computers can be infected with similar viruses. That there's a bit of information which says spread this to another, the same pattern to another computer with instructions to spread it again and again, right? It's very similar. So you see, somehow this is a disease of thought, of knowledge, of information, right? You see, you can see that that is subject to a disease. And this has very serious consequences. These diseases can kill human beings or whole societies physically, or they can kill us. The diseases of knowledge and thought can kill us in another way, or even destroy the planet. Right, so, so if you go into that, you can see that somehow there's a wrong way of thinking that is behind these vast set of troubles. You see, it spreads. Each one excites the other. You see, one form of nationalism excites another. I have a friend in Israel, a professor of social geography, who pointed out that Jewish nationalism in the form of Zionism provoked Palestinian nationalism. In the beginning, there never was any. They never thought of themselves as a nation, right? But you see, one provoked the other and provoked the other back and back, right? And it was all thought, right? In other words, nationalism cannot be anything else but thought, saying we belong to this nation, this territory is ours, right? Now it happens that both of these nations are saying this territory is ours. So what are they going to do? You see, they say we are different. Thought tells us we are different. We cannot get together. You know, we have got to be separate. Thought also tells us this nation belongs to us. This land, right? It's the same thing. You see, you have land and you say, this is mine. Now, how in the world could it be mine? You see, if you look at land, there's nothing in the land which says it's mine, right? There was a famous Indian chief, Chief Seattle or something of that name, who wrote to the President of the United States of that time, a long time ago, I was saying they wanted to make a treaty to buy land from the Indians, and he said, we cannot understand how anybody could own land. So you see, it's a way of thinking. These Indians did not think that way, but the people in Washington did, obviously. Now, the point is that the ownership of land is entirely in thought. Right? If you think you own it, you own it. You see it, provided everybody else will think the same way. If somebody else won't agree with you, then you've got to fight, right? So now, therefore, fights over land are entirely due to the way of thinking, right? You may say, land, this is the way it is, and we'd better stick to it, but when people were fairly separate and so on, and not too many of them, this might have worked up to a point, but now we're all interdependent and it won't work, you see. So money also is thought, right? You see, originally they took gold, but gold doesn't have much value in itself. You can't eat gold or anything, but it was exchanged, right? Now, then gold was replaced by paper, which is even less valuable. And then paper is replaced by bank accounts, and bank accounts are now replaced by little electric currents in computers, another form of thought, right? So therefore, according to what the computer thinks, if the computer thinks you have a lot of money, then you're all right. So if it doesn't think that way, then you cannot get access to what you need, right? So you can see how pervasive this problem of thought is. Say, this nation, that nation, we against them, one family against another, one race against another, one color against another. You see, it's thought which makes those problems very big, right? Now, you see, I think we were talking about last year, suppose you have a black man and somebody comes up and says, I don't like them, and of course, but the fact that he's black is not is picked out by thought, right? You see, he might, as he said, be a banker. Somebody who didn't like bankers would say, I don't like him because he's a banker, right? Or I don't like him because he's Jewish, or I don't like him because he's a communist, or whatever. You see, all of that is thought, right? In other words, people, according to how you think, your prejudice goes accordingly, right? Okay, so I think then that's a sort of a review that I'm saying that thought is behind these problems, and that people generally haven't thought that way. See, in the beginning, thought was considered to be, and it still is, a very valuable thing. Thought also has done all the things which we are proud of, you see. It has built our cities. It has, well, we shouldn't be too proud of them, I suppose. But it has created science and technology and all the things we see. Everything you see in this room, or in practically all of what is called nature here, has been arranged by thought, right? And agricultural and everything, you see. So everything we do has been arranged by thought, right? And it has been very creative, medicine and all sorts of achievements, right? And yet thought also goes wrong somehow, and it produces all this destruction. Now, in the past, people may not have noticed this and have thought only that thought is knowledge is power, ignorance is bad, and so on. But there's a certain danger in knowledge and in thought, which people haven't paid enough attention to. Right? And so okay, we have all this thought, and it's somehow not going right, you see. Maybe it started to go wrong thousands or tens of thousands of years ago, we don't know. If you go back through history, as far as we know, it wasn't doing very well. I mean, there have been endless wars as far back as it goes. There has been slavery, exploitation, plunder, every manner of chaos, every manner of deception. If you go through the Bible, it was always there. If you go back in almost any history, it was always there. And perhaps if you go far enough back, it wasn't so bad because people didn't have the weapons to do much harm, right? But the more technology developed, the more dangerous it became. And now that technology has gone so far, it has become really deadly. You see, it has really become impossible for us to imagine going on with it indefinitely. As I say, for 1,000 years, if you imagine 1,000 years of what's going on now, what will happen? Will there not be some catastrophe or other? Therefore, with the growth of technology, the human race is faced with a tremendous crisis or a challenge, right? That we have got to do something about this thought, right? We have got we can't just let it go on destroying us. I mean, just if you've got a cancer growing in you, you say, well, at some stage I'd better do something about it. Now, a cancer starts to grow slowly, but at some stage it starts to grow very fast and spread. And you say the quicker you do something about it, the better. And that's really where we are, you see. Now, but then what do you do about it? You see, you can't cut out thought. I mean, we couldn't do without it, right? You can't just say, all the bad thoughts are going to be cut out, you see. You can't select them all and cut them out. And so we have to go into it more deeply. I say this is not an obvious thing, you see. It's very subtle. And it goes very deep, you see. Right? Now, we want to get to the root of it, right? To the base, to the source of it. You see, if you imagine a stream which is being polluted near the source, and then people downstream don't know about that, so they start removing bits of pollution, trying to purify their water, but perhaps introducing more pollution of another kind as they do so. And therefore, what we've got to do is to see this whole stream and get to the source of it. You see, somewhere at the source of thought, it is being polluted. That's the suggestion. It is being diverted in some way. It is going in the. It is, you say, taking a wrong turn, but it's taking a wrong turn all the time. You see. You could say in one sense, when they started pouring pollution in, that was the wrong step. But the fact they keep on pouring it in is the main point. It's pouring in all the time. So therefore, the source is not in time. Not to go back to ancient times when it may have started, but rather the source is always now. And that's what we have to look into, you see. Right, so that was more or less sort of a summary of some of the things we talked about last time, and in the beginning. And now, we'll go on. I want to go on with trying to see how we're going to go about it, but perhaps people would like to discuss it a bit first.
I'm kind of intrigued. You're saying that thought is the root of all this, and how I see it is that it's a form of identification, of a person's identification with a limited grouping, such as in nationalism. If I identify myself as an American, as someone from the United States, immediately in my own consciousness I have also identified those things that are not American, that are un-American. And in so doing, I look at those qualities which are un-American with a jaundiced eye perhaps, or with some sort of contempt. It seems to be a phenomenon that as soon as anyone identifies with something conceptually, or color of skin, religion, whatever it may be, that there is also immediately created the opposite situation which is looked down upon.
Yes, that's true, yes, but that's all thought. You see, to identify yourself is to say, I'm the same as such and such. We're all the same, right? And they're all different.
Again, there to identify with the larger.
What?
We are using thought again to identify with the larger.
Yeah, or you can identify with the body. We see, with the simplest identification, say I am the body,
of course,
and then, or I am my appetites, or I am my money. I depend. I am my family, you know, or whatever. And then you identify with something bigger. I am my country, my religion, or my God. I say I'm part of it, or I can say that's part of me, and I can't do without it, right? And that's me. So we're saying me is defined by thought, right? Yeah. Now, is there a me which is not defined by thought? You say, I'm not asking, so don't say yes or no. I'm saying that's the question, right? You know, it looks as if a large part of what we call me is defined by thought, and mostly not even my own thought, but the thought of the whole society and the culture. I pick that up from other people, right? Now, some people pick up, there are a lot of ideas circulating around about how to identify yourself, and what we call subcultures, right? Some people identify with a certain subculture and some people with another one, and they come in conflict. You know, like saying there may be the drug culture, there may be another culture, I don't know, you know. There's all sorts of subcultures. I mean, each national group inside this country, each forms a subculture, which tends to gradually merge with the larger one. And between them there are all sorts of conflicts, but it all comes from thought, right? From thinking. If you think that way, that's the way it is. See, so thought is very powerful.
Well, isn't this what science was, that was why science was developed, I think, is so that it's not true because I say it, or because I'll slug you if you say it isn't. It's, you prove it, and it doesn't make any difference about all of these divisions. It's still true if you can prove it. Isn't this what science partly was trying to do?
Yes, not all thought is wrong. You see, there is thought which is correct, right? For example, here is a flower, you know, and so on. Or I can make a map of this state and drive according to the map. If it's the right map, it gets me there. It directs me, and if it's a wrong map, I don't arrive where I'm supposed to, right? So there is thought which is correct and thought which is incorrect, but you see, we're having a great deal of thought which is incorrect, which is that we are separate from all these other parts of the world when in fact we're not. Now, usually you're ready to correct that. You see, if you're driving on the wrong road and you suddenly realize that, you see the road sign, you don't go ahead, but you say, okay, that's the wrong road, I must find the right road. But when people are driving on the wrong road here and saying, you know, we're driving toward a collision course and to destroy the planet, the move to correct it is very sluggish, if at all, you see. And why? You see, we're seeing that when it comes to identification, what you were saying with the self or with your country or whatever, it seems that there's a move of thought not to be rational, not to see facts, not to acknowledge facts, right? And to be irrational. And say people will overlook, and if your country is doing something, especially during war, people don't want to see that it may be wrong, right? They say, you mustn't criticize this country while we're in trouble. See, if suppose you think the generals are not, doing it right, you mustn't say so, right? It's censorship. They say you will spoil our morale, right? So you see, so they're saying something else takes precedence over truth and fact, right? They're saying we have got to think in a certain way in order to get things going, right? In order to move, right? In order to act, in order to manage, right? You see, we can't manage. So they're saying I can't look at all that stuff because if I did, I wouldn't be able to manage my affairs, right? It would be too disturbing. See, so thoughts could be very disturbing, and then there's a move to not to allow attention to go there. Now that's one of the problems. That's self-deception, right? See, thought moves not toward being correct and factual, but it moves toward self-deception, toward illusion. Now that's dangerous, right? But we don't seem to see the danger. You see, in other words, that thought, when it's moving to self-deception, says it denies there's any danger and says there's no danger, right? Everything is all right. Don't worry. You see, I remember in one of the books I recently wrote, in the introduction, my friend and I referred to a crisis, and somebody who wrote a review said, "Where's the crisis?" You see? I don't know what he was thinking, but perhaps he was thinking that, no, everybody around me looks perfectly all right. I'm making plenty of money, and so are they, and nothing to worry about. So you see, you keep your eye focused narrowly on some limited area and say there's no problem there. And
maybe as well, in a very subtle way, he glimpses the real danger reading your book, and I think you wanted to cover it, maybe, maybe, because I think I read that review and it was real. For me, it was kind of disturbing my organism, and I said probably he has read the book, or maybe he just glimpsed in a very subtle way that here this book brings out something that can be really disturbing, so it's a danger for the self-deception.
yes, that may well be. Now, that's very likely, but you see, of course, we don't know for sure. But the but I'd say that don't want to focus on that one incident, but rather that's very general. And if that only happened once, we'd say, oh, that's not too bad. But it's happening all the time. That's what I'm trying to say.
But I think it's a good example because, for instance, I've done a lot of speaking on behalf of nuclear issues, and very often people of all different ages will respond by saying, well, what can I do about it? I mean, it's bigger than, anything I can do about it. So I think the assumptions that we've discussed, the assumptions in thought, are, one of the things we need to look at. I think that in order to have the energy to look into this, some of these assumptions have got to be looked at.
Yes. Now, you see, if you say, this is too big for me, in one sense it's true, but in another sense I say it's not. Now, you see, if you say the crisis is only the external phenomenon, what's going on, then it's very big, right? It's like saying, suppose you have a dam, which has not been constructed properly and it slowly erodes away, then suddenly it goes, right? And all that wall of water is running down, you're not going to be able to stop it at that moment. But you see, the question is, what about that process which is constantly eroding, making the dam, wrong kind of dam and letting it erode? You see that deeper down, what's going on, that the real crisis is not in these events which are confronting us, like wars and crime, and drugs and economic chaos and pollution and all that. But it's really, what is the thought which is making it all the time? Now, you see, each person can do something about that thought because he's in it. You see, now one of the troubles we get into is to say it's them who is thinking all that and me who is thinking right. But I say that's a mistake, you see. You see, I think that thought pervades us, and the minute, it's like viruses, as soon as they enter you, they'll start to multiply unless there's an immune system that stops them. Right? So the kind of thought that's going on all around us begins to take over in every one of us, without even noticing it. And do we have a kind of immune system or something that stops it, you see? Now the only way to stop it is to recognize it, to acknowledge it, to see what it is. Now, therefore, if any one of us starts to look at that, then we are looking at the source of the problem. It's the same in all of us, huh? You see, we may imagine that the source of the problem is somebody over there is thinking these wrong thoughts, or a lot of people are. But the source of the problem is much deeper, that something is going wrong in the whole process of thought, which is socio-cultural, which belongs to all of us. That it's sort of spreading like a virus. And each one of us is nourishing that virus. Is that, so if you begin to see that, then you are beginning to do something about what's going wrong. Now, that doesn't guarantee that we're ever going to stop it, but it's the beginning. It's the only way you can hope to begin. You see, the saying, if enough of us do it, then it will start to change.
What I seem to be hearing is like she was saying, the assumption, we have to get at some of these assumptions. The primary one being that of individuality. being individual, separate.
Yes, well, we have that assumption. We must question it. You see, in some sense it's true, we are separate, but in another sense it isn't. With regard to thought, it is not true. Maybe physically it has some truth.
But thought maintains that assumption that we are individual.
Yes. So that is an assumption. We'd have to question that our thought is our own individual thought. Now, to some extent it is. We have some independence, but we must look at it. It's more subtle than to say it's individual or not individual. You see, we've got to see what thought really is without presuppositions. Now, see, if you say, I'm going to question whether it's individual, then we shouldn't jump to the opposite extreme and say it's not, it's collective, you see. But rather, we have got to see what thought really is. And whatever is going wrong, that's the first step to try to understand what is really going on. Now, what is really going on when we're thinking? Now, I'm trying to say that most of our thought, its general form, is not individual. It originates in the whole culture, and it pervades us. We pick it up as children from parents, from friends, from school, and from newspapers, books, and so on. We make a small change in it. And we select certain parts of it which we like, and we may reject other parts, but still it all comes from that pool, right?
Well, that's right. It isn't just a question of well, I have switched from Democrat to Republican, or I have switched from socialism to capitalism, or any of these things, because they're all part of the problem, right?
Yeah. Yes, you see, it's not a question of the particular content of thought, but it has to do with what we may call the deeper structure of thought, which is common to all of us. It's like with atoms. You have an atomic structure that is common to all atoms of a certain kind. And you see, if you understand one of them, you understand something about all of them, right? See, so when people learned to disintegrate a few uranium atoms, that implied something for all of them. It opened the way to chain reactions and so on. Now, what I want to say is that this deep structure of thought, which is the source, this eternal, constant source, timeless, it's always there. It's not that we go back in time when it can, but it's constantly working, right? And this deep structure of thought is what we have to get at, and this is what is common, right? Now, but we'll have to come to this, that the content of thought and the deep structure are not really that separate, because the way we think about thought has an effect on its structure. For example, if we think that the thought is coming from me individually, this will affect how thought works. So we have to look at both content and structure, right? Now that's the sort of thing we're aiming for in this period of time and in this weekend. There's some things I would like to bring out about this content and structure. Right? To see what I'm saying, we want to get some insight into how it's all going. Without this insight, I say we are going to find it very hard to get to do anything. Right? We're sort of just caught in this whole whirlpool, and if some of us have this insight, it has a meaning or a significance or a value, even though only a few of us have it. Right? It's not right to think, well, we're just a few of us and there's this tremendous wave of destruction. That will make you very depressed, right? But unnecessarily so. I think we all get into it, but it is not really necessary to do that, right? Now, we can't tell whether the human race is going to get through this or not, you see. That's a fact, you see, but we can't tell it isn't going to get through either. So, see, some people faced with this uncertainty may want to be certain and just say, well, I'd rather believe it's not going to get through. I remove this uncertainty. But the only thing you can say is that what I'm suggesting is this, that when we look at this, we are looking at the real source of the difficulty in ourselves or in this group or wherever. It is all one, right? So if we can see it here, we have seen the essence, right? Now, and that has significance, right?
A moment ago when you said have an insight into the thought, you weren't meaning simply to have an accurate description of the situation, but something more.
Yeah. It's to see its inner nature, to really see into it, right? Like you have an insight into a puzzle or whatever, is a very simple, a small case of it, right? You see, I like to play with words, you know, like the word evidence has the root videre, to see, right? Video. It means to see outwardly. The evidence is what you see outwardly. Now, if there were a corresponding English word which had the same Latin root, you would have the word invidence, to see inwardly, right? But the English word for that is insight. So from the evidence, you need an insight, or else you don't understand, right? The evidence alone won't get you anywhere. It's just the outside, right? But without the evidence, you also can't get anywhere. So we have to see the meaning of it. To see what it all means, right? Now that's a kind of inner perception. Now, this is an extraordinarily difficult kind of inner perception, or at least it looks that way. You see, suppose you're doing a scientific problem or a technical problem. You have a lot of evidence, certain facts, and so on. You don't understand how the thing works, but as you work with it, suddenly you see how it all works, right? And we could call that a kind of insight, looking into it. But see, here we have got to see how thought works, and usually we use thought to look at things, to figure things out. Now, how are we going to do it now, you see? I'm just raising the question, right? But, I'm not going to answer it right away. You see that we are facing an extraordinary question, which is, it could be asked, say, what is the instrument with which you see how thought works?
Well, one of the things that I notice is that when one attempts to look at thought, one looks through time, thinking that one can achieve something through seeing certain parts of it. But more and more, that seems just to create more confusion. And that seems to be one of the processes of thought, to work through time. So.
Yes, well, thought does work through time. It takes time to think, and thought projects time as past and future, right? Mm-hmm. Now, well, I think I was going to say something about that a little further on, but
the instrument to see thought can't be thought itself.
Well, probably not, but you see, if it isn't thought, then what is it?
Isn't it possible
Perception.
just to watch?
Yeah, yes, perception, but not only sense perception.
Well, it's a deeper inner thing that's not thought. It's insight, or it's of a different nature than thought.
Yes, it is a different nature than thought, and yet we need clear thinking to present this problem. You see, one of the things which is interfering with insight is just thought, right? The way thought works, that it works in such a way as to prevent insight. For example, if we have the assumption that thought is being produced by the self, by the thinker, then you experience it that way, and then in a way you're denying that thought is being, you're denying what is actually happening and presenting another picture, you see. Now that makes it very hard to have an insight. You see that the thought contains a deceptive function, or it produces some illusory picture. And you see, so if you say, we have got to get the evidence, you see, and if we look inwardly, when we look inwardly at first, we will look at a picture which has been fabricated by thought. You see, and therefore we will have the wrong evidence. You see that we'll have the wrong starting point. See, that's what I'm trying to say. It's a very subtle thing which we have to go into slowly.
You mean that you might have to, if you had a so-called problem, that you would look at that and try to resolve it, and it may be created by the thinking itself, so it's the wrong premise to start from.
Yes, you see, the thinking creates things which don't seem to be thought. Now you see, if I say that the sense of self has been created by thought, but that's not the way we experience it, right? So when you just look inwardly, you feel, I am here thinking. Now, you see, it's no use trying to deny the evidence of your perception, or at least you seem to perceive it that way, you see. That seems to be the phenomenon. Now, you can't begin by denying the phenomenon and saying it's something else, you see, because now the phenomenon is produced to a large extent by thought, but thought doesn't know it's doing it. That's the point we're coming to.
But if
Yeah.
dbohm.com